But it looks like that Donald Trump is becoming increasingly frustrated with Russia's President Vladimir Putin's reluctance to end the war in Ukraine and is now threatening Russia with tougher sanctions if it does not reach a ceasefire agreement with Ukraine within 50 days. So how did the relationship between the two leaders turn sour? Let's take a look.
The good old days, from Russia's perspective. In his first term as U.S. president, Donald Trump praised Vladimir Putin, taking his word on election interference over that of his own intelligence agencies and disparaging traditional U.S. allies. Putin congratulated Trump on his second election victory, seeming to have great expectations of a reset after the Biden years.
We have seen the statements of the newly elected U.S. president and the members of his team about their desire to restore direct contacts with Russia. We certainly welcome such an approach and congratulate the U.S. president-elect on taking office.
The two leaders have had at least 6 official phone calls since Trump's inauguration in January. Initially, Trump seemed to take Putin's side over Ukraine's, berating Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House, blaming him for starting the war in his country, and briefly cutting off weapons shipments and intelligence sharing. Putin seemed to take that as a green light to escalate further in Ukraine. While the grinding war continued on the front line, Russia fired more and more missiles and kamikaze drones at Ukrainian cities. There were negotiations in Saudi Arabia between U.S. and Russian diplomats to end the war. There were negotiations in Turkey, Zelensky waiting in vain as Putin didn't show up. Trump, who sold himself as the consummate dealmaker, now couldn't close the deal.
Look, nothing's going to happen until Putin and I get together, okay?
But the war went on and there was no face-to-face meeting. The tone coming out of the White House started to change. In May, Trump took to social media to say, "Something has happened to Putin. He's gone absolutely crazy." All along, the Kremlin maintained a respectful tone, praising Trump's strength and leadership. But with a massive drone attack on Ukraine's capital Kyiv that came just hours after a Trump-Putin phone call, Putin may have overplayed his hand.
But I am very disappointed with President Putin. I thought he was somebody that meant what he said, and he'll talk so beautifully, and then he'll bomb people at night. We don't like that. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
The one-time friendship seemed to have soured against all expectations. But Trump has changed his mind before, savoring his reputation as an unpredictable leader. That leaves some hope for Vladimir Putin that the tables may turn once again.
We asked the journalist and Russia analyst Catherine Belton how Putin is likely to view Trump's 50-day ceasefire ultimatum.
Yes, we don't know until he actually speaks, but for sure, it's not likely he's going to respond well to ultimatums. He doesn't like feeling pressured. He doesn't want to feel like he's on the back foot. And indeed, as your correspondent mentioned, really the hope in Moscow is that this is just a passing phase in the Trump-Putin relationship, that at some point Trump will forget all about the fact that he's souring on Putin and perhaps wave his hand at the Ukraine conflict because he realizes it's intractable, and just leave Russia to deal with Ukraine one-on-one and maybe partially with Europe, which Russia thinks it can deal with. So I think at the moment we've heard from Russia's foreign minister, which is dismissed, Sergei Lavrov, who has dismissed this as just another ultimatum. He said, we've heard all this before. We had 100 days, we heard 24 hours, now it's 50 days. So all this makes no difference. He says, we're coping with sanctions and no doubt we'll cope with more sanctions. But, I think there are worries among some sections of the Russian elite that Putin could well have overplayed his hand.
Now, by ignoring Trump's efforts to make a peace deal and indeed intensifying the attacks on Ukraine, Putin has humiliated Donald Trump. What are his motives?
I just think he thinks he can get away with it. He believes that he is right. And as one Russian analyst put it to me last night, he said, why should we stop an offensive against a retreating army? Russia believes that it has the upper hand, that the West is weak, that the West can't get its act together on coordinating sanctions, that ultimately it will prevail. I mean, it's been watching the disarray in the White House. It was only just less than 2 weeks ago that the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, was putting a halt on further aid to Ukraine. So, I mean, it's just, and there's a lot of infighting as well in the US administration. People are still battling to influence Trump over this. So I think at the end of the day, Putin is gambling that whatever the US is now going to supply via Europe isn't going to be enough to change the situation on the battlefield. He still thinks he's going to have the upper hand because the Kremlin has control over the Russian defense industry and has plowed many more funds into it than Europe or the US has managed to do in their own defense industries.
Now, Trump's tone towards Putin has shifted significantly since he took office in January. What would you say is the current status of their friendship, if we want to call it that?
Well, it was for sure a bromance, and I think Putin really believed he has a special relationship with Trump, and Trump also believed that he has that special relationship with Putin. He really believed that he was the one who would be able to get Putin to come to the negotiating table and stop the war. But obviously it hasn't happened that way. And I think perhaps Putin was lulled into perhaps a false sense of security, because indeed in the initial months since Trump's inauguration, a lot of Trump's envoys were saying, basically repeating Kremlin talking points on the war and blaming Ukraine for its beginning and essentially saying that Russia should have full control of the regions that it's illegally annexed, even though it doesn't control all the territory of it yet. So I think they just thought they could do whatever they want, and it was unlikely that Trump would take a stand. And I guess Trump's statement last night, despite all the hoo-ha and kind of fanfare over it ahead of time, again shows that Trump is not quite ready to go all in against Russia. Okay, so he's supplying weapons now via Europe, and that is a very big step indeed. He's also deploying strategic ambiguity over what those weapon shipments might be, leaving the Kremlin guessing over how much hot water it might get in. But he has stopped short of imposing further sanctions. The Russian economy is really hurting now. He's given Russia a further window of 50 days. Russia only needs 50 days for its summer offensive, so it will continue regardless.
Catherine Belton there, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Well, let's discuss this. I'm joined now by Boris Vormann, Director of the Politics section at Bard College here in Berlin. Boris, what do you make of Trump's latest threats to Russia? Has he really changed his mind on Putin?
It does look like there's a major shift happening here and that there's a certain momentum in this whole discussion. But I think it is right that Trump has never articulated anything like a very clear foreign policy vision. I mean, yes, there is the shift towards mercantilism, protectionism. There's the shift away from the liberal order. The US has become very volatile, but oftentimes there's a link to domestic policy, an attempt to maybe sometimes try and distract from certain things that aren't going quite right at home, like the Epstein bill right now, or maybe also the so-called big, beautiful bill that might not have the success that Trump was anticipating. So it is still a volatile mix, and we don't really know how this is going to play out.
In personal terms, so what about the bromance between the two leaders? Have we reached the breakup phase of their relationship?
Never. I must honestly say I've never quite understood this relationship. And yes, it was labeled bromance. There was something to that label, I guess. Trump seems to have a weak spot for strong leaders or autocrats. And this is something we've seen all along already in the first administration. But yes, at the same time, he himself wants to be perceived as a strong leader. I think Putin catered to this for quite a while and congratulated him and so on and so forth. But now there's a confrontation that is difficult to avoid, I guess. And Trump, in order to take a strong position, is becoming more confrontational.
Now, you've touched upon this. Trump had promised that he's the one to get Putin to the negotiating table. Is it time for him to admit he's failing?
I don't think he would ever admit that, but it's true that it was a campaign promise that he would end the war on day one of taking office. I think he still has his eye on the Nobel Prize and would like to end this conflict along with the Middle Eastern conflict in order to be in a position to get that prize. I think with Trump, really, it's not super complex. It's a lot is about personal ego and recognition.
Well, talking about personal ego, if we look at the other side of this, now that the US is re-engaging in Ukraine, do you think that Putin has miscalculated how he played the American president?
Perhaps. I mean, it is interesting that the US is now siding against with NATO, is restabilizing the order, but I think a lot of damage has been done in the meantime. And there's a major shift. The US doesn't seem willing, and maybe also not capable anymore, of providing certain global public goods as it had all the way back to 1945. I mean, one of the reasons why it was the hegemon, especially after the fall of the wall, was because it was able to provide security, to build infrastructures, to maintain the lead currency, etc. And now these things are on the table, and there's a lot of trust that has been damaged, and the volatility is certainly questioning this broader order. So in that sense, I think Putin has been aiming to undermine the West and to undermine this liberal order. In so far, he hasn't miscalculated, but there is a shift, and that will change the momentum.
Do you think the 50 days, that is, quite a lot of time, is a hint that there is a way out for Putin?
Yeah, I guess, and that's been discussed internationally in different media outlets, that 50 days is quite a lot of time to give Putin leverage and ways to maneuver. So we will see what happens until then. It's not the first time that Trump has also set an ultimatum and then simply forgotten about it or not picked it up at any later time.
Boris Vormann, thank you very much.
Thank you.